that because, as was said, small satellites or big satellites, the space treaties apply. You are obliged to authorize and supervise. You are responsible. You can be held liable for damage. So it is in the interest of the state to not remain under the radar and to have these small satellites also in that whole authorization procedure. So this was probably a different interpretation of national activities in outer space, but the National Act does provide a provision for extending the scope, making changes to the law, well, not changes to the law, but extending the scope by administrative measure. And that is what has happened after a process of studies and consultations, including the industry. There was an administrative measure that was adopted and by the Parliament in January, on the 19th of January, and that will take effect on the 1st of July, meaning that small satellites will also come under the regime of the Netherlands Space Act, and therefore they will also have to go through the licensing requirements. If you read the memorial, the explanatory note of the administrative measure, which actually just is one article relevant that says unguided satellites also will have to require a license. The aim is to encourage innovation, to to promote the interaction between education and industry, to boost the international position of the Netherlands in this field. So you see here very clearly this policy of the Netherlands, which is very clearly we want to promote the use of these satellites, and we want to have a clear regulatory framework to deal with that. The risk of small satellites is not considered smaller than that for bigger satellites, so similar conditions have to apply. It was, however, recognized that imposing an insurance that is similar to that imposed on operators of small satellites is perhaps not feasible, because that would mean that the insurance amount that you would have to buy would be higher than the value of your project. So it was recognized that that lower amounts of third-party liability coverage could be imposed. So that is the kind of variations that you can bring into to the situations. Conclusions, small satellites are space objects under the UN treaties. They must be authorized and supervised just as any other space objects, and this is flowing from treaty obligations that are adopted by states. States enter into agreements in treaties and then have to make sure that their obligations are implemented. Recommendation to small satellite operators is to look at legal issues from the start, not as an afterthought, and to engage into communication and discussion with the authorities in their country so that they are aware of what is needed and what is required. And also on behalf of the states, I think there is a duty to educate and to create awareness, to create awareness about the obligations, and I think that is what this workshop is contributing to very much. I would like to leave it at that. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Tanja. I'd like to open the floor for one or two questions, if any, to Tanja.
I have a question concerning the Dutch liability issue in the space law, because you mentioned that in some cases it can be lowered to some 20,000 euro, if this is correct. The Austrian space law foresees a 60 million liability insurance, which is compulsory, but this may be exempted in case that the space activity is in the national interest. And for instance, university activity can be considered as in public interest. So is there a minimum insurance requirement in the Netherlands, or can it be exempted altogether?
The national space legislation requires insurance, and the requirement in the law, so you cannot go around that, is that it has to be the maximum available on the market to be decided by the minister. So we do not have, like in Austria, a specific amount, like you have 60 million euros. We do not have a similar amount mentioned in the law, and we also do not have a similar exemption. As I understand it, Austrian law allows for exemption of the insurance, but that does not necessarily mean that the liability is also lifted. So
no, liability is not lifted, but the compulsory insurance can be taken off, and then it may be transferred to the government who has been funding the activity. In case,
that is not a logical consequence of limiting, of taking away the insurance obligation. I would even recommend to a university in Austria to still take insurance, because they are maybe not obliged to have that because it is an educational satellite, but it does not mean that they are also going to be exempted from liability. And this smaller amount of insurance was discussed, and it is related to the fact that many launchers nowadays will provide launch insurance plus 1 year in orbit. And so it is an analysis of the risk that was made. Of course, the biggest risk of any space operation is the launch. That is when things go wrong. And as far as in-orbit risks are concerned, you're talking about collisions. So in the first place, small satellites will not stay a long time in space because they are small and they will disintegrate into the atmosphere as they return back to Earth. And moreover, as we've seen earlier, there is, in the case of a collision of two objects in outer space, a fault liability. So even if there would be some kind of collision, the difficulty of establishing fault makes, according to insurers, this risk actually quite small. So that justifies having a lower amount, which is the advantage of not having an amount in the law. I understand that in Austria, where you do have an amount, the solution is perhaps to have the exemption possibility.
Thank you very much.
Thank you. If no other questions, then, well, I would like to thank Niklas and Tanja for their presentations. I would invite right now a few members of the following session, which are in fact some representing from the administration of Holland, Finland, UK, Bright, Planet Labs, and I think also representative of UK Space Office just to come there. As I was mentioning, in fact, yes, right, and CalPoly. I forget one, and CalPoly. The issue, in fact, was hopefully to have enough room here, and the issue was particularly, in fact, having listening to those issues about authorizations, having listening also to those issues regarding the generic and general approach and regulatory framework, is to have a first, I would say, the first thought by people from different administrations, as well as, well, absolutely. Are there enough seats? It's okay. To have, in fact, the views I've seen from people from administrations about a few words about the national legislations regarding small sat and any issue that would be, in fact, related to that. And I would ask, rather than spend my time to present yourself, I know many of you, just maybe before doing your statements, just to say a few words about your backgrounds. At this stage, and it's my, I would say my privilege, how do I organize the people to speak about, either randomly or not? Well, in order to ensure that we're sure that we get to everybody, definitely, and not seeing any political approach with it, from left to right, from right to left, from the center to the X.
Our left is the right.
Absolutely, and I agree with you, your left is our right, etc. So without anything, I may ask to maybe that you're on your side, just to begin. A few words about you, and just to say also a few words about those issues regarding national legislations, I understand in Austria, and well, whatever the issue which are discussed, which are at stake, and whatever things are coming on. Please, Otto.
Okay. Thank you very much. My name is Otto Kudelka. I'm head of the Institute of Communication Networks and Satellite Communications, and I'm responsible for Bright Austria, a nanosatellite which will be presented tomorrow. And I would like to give a few points of our own experience with the process of frequency coordination, then compliance to the Austrian space law, and the registration process, if that's fine with you, Chairman.
Well, yes, that's quite fine.
Okay.
But having said that, yes, please go on.
Okay. So we started the activity in 2006. Bright Austria was completely nationally funded by the Austrian Aeronautics and Space Agency in the framework of the National Austrian Space Program. It's a collaboration between TU Graz, the University of Vienna, and the Spaceflight Lab of the University of Toronto. Bright as a mission had already been defined by UTIAS early on, and some of you may know that UTIAS had already developed an astronomical satellite called MOST. It was launched in 2003, and it's a little bit bigger than a nanosatellite, but it's built according to the same development rules, no space-qualified hardware, and MOST is still operating in 2015, so it's pretty good. So we at TU Graz, we were interested in a technological missions. Our friends at the University of Vienna Institute of Astrophysics, they were interested in doing astronomy, so we teamed up, and this is how the mission came all about. Contract was signed in February 2006, and immediately after we contacted the Austrian administration, the Radio Regulation Office, and we started the process. So the parameters of the spacecraft were known, so size, mass, also the minimum and the maximum possible orbital height was predetermined. So for this reason, we could already make the Lynch budgets and everything, so we could do that. And then in a next step, we did through the Austrian administration the frequency coordination, which was very straightforward. And I'm particularly grateful to Attila, who always helped us when we, privately, when we met at some conferences. This was very helpful. Also, the Austrian administration was extremely cooperative, so this was a very smooth process in the frequency coordination. We are using S-band in downlink and UHF in the uplink, so we had to coordinate both with YARU and with ITU. There were a few requests for clarification from some administrations, but this was also quite straightforward, because there were clarification requests coming from Asia-Pacific region, and this was very easy because we are not operating there. Service area is Austria, so there is no possibility for interference there. So this was very smooth. Then, when the frequencies were finally coordinated and assigned, the other process was 2 years before launch, the Austrian space law was set in force. So everything was compliant with this. And then as soon as we had got the identification of the space object, this was about 14 days after launch, when we had from NORAD an assignment, we notified the Ministry of Transport, Innovation and Technology, which is responsible for space in Austria. And the ministry then informed the Ministry of Foreign Affairs, and the Ministry of Foreign Affairs then did the registration with UN OSA, and it's in the UN database. So this in brief was the process of that. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much, Otto. I understand